Custos, please.
Good afternoon. As the Custos appointed by the Research Council of the Theatre Academy, I declare this public defense of Master of Performing Arts, Vincent Roumagnac, open. The opponents of this defense are Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of Film and Media, Røed from the University of the Arts, Stockholm, and Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of Theatre and Performance, Lavery from the University of Glasgow. The course of the defense is as follows. At first, the defender gives the preparatory lecture, which will last 25 minutes. After that, the opponents give their general statements, which is followed by the examination of the doctorate. Then the opponents make their appraisal. After that, there is a possibility for the audience to pose questions to the defender. After that, the defense will end. Due to the hybrid form of this defense, we will stay seated throughout the event. The defender, the floor is yours.
Auditorium. Instructions for the defender. Arrangements concerning the course of the public defense as part of
You don't have sound? Okay, I start it again.
Public defense. Defender. Custos. Opponents. At the premises of the Academy. Studio. Theater. Auditorium. Instructions for the defender. Arrangements concerning the course of the public defense as part of the doctoral degree in theater art. The defense follows an academic protocol defining the roles and the responsibilities of the participating persons. Those participating in the defense are expected to be familiar with them and to respect them. The defender, the opponents, and the Custos wear dark suits, formal dark dresses or academic dresses with possible academic insignia. It is possible to be flexible about the dress code for justified reasons. The matter is to be discussed with the Custos. There are no special guidelines for the audience on the way of dressing one. The doors to the space reserved for the public defense are opened for public 5 minutes before the time published in the invitation to. Those concerned arrive at the public defense 15 minutes academic quarter after the time published in the invitation, in the following order: the defender, the Custos, and the opponents. The audience stands until the Custos, the opponents, and the defender have taken their seats. 3. Possible academic insignia, such as doctors' hats, are carried in the hand and placed on the table for the defense. 4. When all present have taken their seats, the Custos, still standing, opens the defense by saying, as the Custos appointed by the Research Council of the Theatre Academy, I declare this public defense of title, NN, whole name, open. 5. The Custos then presents the opponents with their titles and explains to the public the course of the defense as stated in 613 below 6. The defender begins the preparatory lecture, Lectio Precursoria, with the following words: Honored Custos, honored opponents, dear assembly, The defender remains standing while delivering the preparatory lecture. The preparatory lecture is a concise 20-30 minutes introduction by the defender on the central questions of her research and its contribution in the field. The preparatory lecture is carried out as a performative arrangement characteristic of the research project 7. The defender ends the preparatory lecture with the following words: "Honored opponents, I now call upon you to present your critical comments on my doctorate." 8. The opponent rise to make their general statements. The defender and the opponents then take their seats. The general statement is a brief talk prepared by the opponents in advance where they present the central contents of the doctorate with respect to the field of art and the earlier research conducted within the field. The general statement can be jointly written by the opponents and it can include performative material 9. The examination of the doctorate follows. The examination of the doctorate is based on the questions asked by the opponent and the answers provided by the defender. The realization of the doctoral research is critically evaluated and, when the opponents have no more remarks, they stand up to make their appraisal, and based on the examination completed and the discussion conducted, announce whether they will propose to the Research Council of the Theatre Academy that the doctorate be accepted or rejected. The defender remains standing while the opponents speak. 11. The defender thanks the opponents, still standing, after which he or she turns to the audience and says, "If anyone present wishes to make any comments concerning my doctorate, please ask the Custos for the floor." 12. The Custos presides over the discussion, gives the speakers the floor, and oversees the discussion. 13. The Custos declares the defense closed by saying the public defense has ended. It is customary to organize a party in honor of the opponents after the public defense. Theatre Academy has no special traditions nor does it expect that other academic traditions are observed, so the defender can give a party that highlights his or her personality.
Honored Custos, honored opponents, dear assembly, there, then. This is the solastalgic epilogue. Drought and desertification will be widespread. Large-scale adaptations to sea level rise will be necessary. Human and natural systems will be subject to increasing levels of agricultural pests and diseases, and increases in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. This world will also be rapidly losing its ecosystem services, owing to large biodiversity and habitat loss, including of forests, coastal wetlands, mangroves, salt marshes, and an acidified and potentially dysfunctional marine ecosystem. In the meantime, machines will be learning fast. The quantity of generated and stored data will be growing fast and big. The speed at which the data will be generated and processed to meet the demands that will lie in the path of what we call growth or development will be increasing. They, earthly human techno-animals, will gradually be aware of living in a time when human activity poses a profound impact on their physical and ecological environment. However, this transformation will be often not perceptible. They will be literally too small or too big, too slow or too fast, so that their senses, even their imaginations, and despite the fact that they will have adequate theoretical and technical instruments at hand, will not grasp them. They, as artists, will be currently facing these climatic regimes and intensities, whether biospheric or algorithmic, feeling disoriented with their capacity to create time and space for experience to account for this ecological transition in a sensitive and reflective way. They, as theatre artists, will feel a need to renew their tools and registers of representation to redirect the scenic attention towards the many other than human actors and factors that will have already entered the stage of their future, which will already be their contemporaneity. This aesthetic reset will call for scenic responses that will have to go beyond the conventional production and organization of what we call now a stage that will have, in their opinion, become inoperative in its spatio-temporal conventional settings, the human-sized here and now, for addressing the scales of those hyper-objects, as philosopher Timothy Morton will coin, in the middle of the second decade of the 21st century. Based on this concern, the candidate's artistic research project will look into the relationship between scenic thinking and time ecology, as the candidate will say. Focusing on three speculative dynamics and notions deepening the stage, neganthroposcenic chronotopias, and hyperdramatic theatre, the candidate will propose a methodology of inquiry and experimentality into the question of how to reroute the practice of directing into the practice of redirecting, from what they will coin as a reacclimated temporal ecology of the stage. Operating from the assumption of a crisis of time and looking at, whilst being moved by, I quote from the candidate's e-thesis, queered temporalities such as heterochrony, anachrony, pluritemporality, idiorhythmy. The research will seek to aggregate artistic experiments and academy-responsive expositional supplements on the question of the revision of a stage in time of this crisis of time, and in the face of climatic, environmental, and technosocial turmoil of the 21st century. Through the artistic testing of a regime of temporal diffraction of the established now-ness of the theatrical representation, the candidate's project will aim at reformulating the regimes of scenic co-presences, the social function of what we call theatre, and therefore the agency of what we call the director. Reformulation that will take into account, I quote again, the stage no more a center, but a milieu, a porous and contingent ghosting milieu in and through which other than human agency and temporality have come into play. The candidate's research will thus aim at developing scenic sensitivity and experiences by redirecting spectatorial attentions towards other than human material and temporal scales. This redirection will imply the projection of the theatre beyond human history and perception, from the deep time of geological strata to the light speed of algorithm-driven data flow. In other words, the candidate's research will contribute to answering the question, I quote, how does one ecologically revise, renegotiate, and re-establish the human aesthetic production and organization of a stage in order to free the stage from the embedded and considered as unsustainable anthropocentric mechanisms? A structural reset that ethically will face a double bind of, on the one hand, the need to soften the agency of the director in relation to other than human earthly living entities and biospheric phenomena, and, on the other hand, the poetical and political necessity of strengthening a production of imaginary in relation to non-human expanding tech environments. The candidates reacclimating the stage Skenomorphosis project will not intend to produce a radical break with theatre practices and history, but it will seek to enable a new way of thinking about the stage from a temporal, spatial, agential, and material perspective. In this sense, the project will deconstruct, queer, play. These would be the candidate's strategic terms, with Western theatre's memories, rituals, architectures, literature, and the given materiality of the obvious comprehension of the stage. The candidate will refer here to their supervisor Esa Kirkopelto's thesis in order to generate a poetical shift, or better yet, a transitional move in time of collapsologic, solastalgic, and pandemic zeitgeist. The same kind of continuous dynamics will apply to the distribution and therefore redistribution of agencies between human and non-human actors, agents. The candidate would refer here to anthropologists, theologists, and social scientists Bruno Latour, but also hybrids and monsters that would undermine the referent dichotomy. Agencies will be about to be reshuffled. Yet the project agenda will not seek to replace the ones, human, by the others, other than human, but rather to enmesh and complexify their relationships in the production of a stage. Human agency in the production, organization, control, and activation of the emerging stage will be indeed re-evaluated, but not suspended. Repositioning. The candidate will worship neo-techno, eco-feminist theoreticians like Donna Haraway and Karen Barad. Repositioning will be at stake, and representational tensions will be at play. Anthropocenic with an S, as eco-dramaturgy scholars such as Una Chowdhury or Theresa May will spell it then. Anthropocenic strategies and dynamics of excentering, perforating, deepening, and redirecting will imply a binary starting ground made of an inside and an outside, a center and a periphery, a stage and a backstage. These strategies and dynamics will be motional logics that will aim at materializing the shift, not at producing a utopian new stage ex nihilo. However, binary settings of the experiments will tend to blur and fork, yet they will still rhetorically support the thinking and materializing of the candidates' scenographic operations. They will enter into play as history, legacy, and continuity. querying will be therefore to be understood in the candidate's research not as a disruptive process, but as deviation from this inherited, internalized, embedded theatre hardware. The candidate will consider the perspective of the happening of a total inclusion or total vanishing of exteriority as tendency and speculation, yet the candidate will still contemplate and therefore try to reformulate separation as inevitable condition for the appearance of a stage. The candidate will fail. Failing of the reversal process will always be part of the artistic outcome. Methodologically, the candidate's doctoral research will be carried out as an aggregative and multi-layered process in the medium of artistic practice, a research through the art. It will find its processual path in the multitemporal manifestation of the artworks that will be intentionally hyper-produced in the chosen and evolving epistemic framework. On the one hand, a linear mode of hyper-production of a corpus of artworks, and on the other hand, a recursive, diachronic, and enmeshed mode of recontextualization of the same corpus through artistic research expositions within artistic research growing community. Over the doctoral continuum, the candidate's artistic research will also solidify into examined artistic parts that will operate as a diptych. At the end of the process, a research exposition will emerge at the crossing of the artistic and epistemic entanglement as an object of hybridization, digitally metastabilized through a non-linear, archipelagic, and multitemporal mode on the research catalog platform. This expositional supplement that the candidate will also name their ecotonal doctoral piece will consist of the online reactivation of the documentation of all the artistic components, also called scène, which will be realized in the framework of the artistic research project and of a few more projects realized before and after the time slot of the doctoral studies. This organizational reiteration being speculatively considered writing. In French, scène means at the same time scene and stage. And by the way, temps, which was in French a final S in its singular occurrence, means at the same time time and weather. "15 paragonal entries will be added to this first block. They will correspond to diverse forms, formats, registers of writing about his research over the course of the whole process, and as responses to diverse demands, contexts, and codes of institutional verbal articulation of the project. Eventually, the candidate will propose that their doctoral commentary will be time encapsulated, sent, examined, and defended in the future, partly because the candidate will not be able to decide a date for a disclosure, and partly because the institution will not show much understanding for this request. The doctoral project defense will be published during a hit and viral wave of August of Western Linear Time year 2020. Finally, with regard to the public defense of the project, the candidate will try to find original stratagems to escape the hyper-present, linear, finalizing, and logocentric character of such a ritual. The candidate will fail. But the candidate will take the opportunity of such an intensity to thank, once again, warmly, their opponents, their chair, their two supervisors, the public, attending a 35-second delayed streaming in a virus-safe auditorium next door, and all the friends, family members, and colleagues here and at home in Helsinki, local time 12:40 a.m., Biarritz, Montpellier, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, Tromsø, and Barcelona, local time 11:40 a.m., San Francisco and Santa Monica, 2:30 a.m., Montréal, 5h30 du matin, Buenos Aires, 6:30 a.m., Reykjavik, 9:30 a.m., Glasgow, 10:30 a.m., Kyoto and Tokyo, 6:30 p.m. Everyone who will have helped them to be there then. At the end of the preparatory lecture, the candidate will show a 5-minute video of the final exhibition, meanwhile changing clothes. Then the candidate will reappear and end with the following words: "Honored opponents, I now call upon you to present your critical comments on my doctorate." Honored opponents, I now call upon you to present your critical comments on my doctorate.
Thank you. So, first of all, congratulations to you, Vincent, on this final manifestation of your artistic research project. It has been an intriguing pleasure to follow it through its various phases, and we are very grateful for having been invited to do so. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here also, although here today, to explore and discuss where your research has taken you. I will now summarize your thesis and my comments on it before I hand the word over to Carl, who will reflect further on what it does. So, the candidate, Vincent Roumagnac, has presented the artistic research project as an exposition on the research catalogue. This exposition constitutes an assembly of documentation of 26 completed artworks or scenes that he has made as research and that has appeared in various international as well as local artistic and academic contexts. The documented artworks are in company of another 14 artistic experiments that have occurred within the context of the research, 5 so-called double postcards, and 15 documents containing various instances of verbal articulation about and as part of the research. Quite in line with the candidate's research interests, the material is laid out in a non-linear exposition, visually organized in a grid of 56 cells, superimposed on what seems to be a two-dimensional draft of an antique theatre, with the scene, proscenium, orchestra, cavias, and paradoi. As the material reveals, these elements are part of the spatial temporal conditions of theatre that the candidate has challenged through the research, which directs attention towards the future through the present and examines conditions for making theatre by exploring a post-anthropocentric stage and transforming or opening up theatre into more than human space and, in particular, time. A porous and contingent milieu, as you heard, where new imaginaries are produced through a redistribution and redirection of material conditions, and as well as agency, time, and power. The research is strongly anchored in and executed through the candidate's practice as a theatre maker, and fueled by doubt concerning what he perceives as an anthropocentrism embedded in the very mechanisms of theatre, impossible in a time when human activity poses such a profound biospheric and algorithmic impact on the environment, and such human-centered forms and perspectives do not seem to enable a future. As the material of the commentary reveals, the candidate has explored these questions through a continuous artistic process, manifesting as an interconnected plurality where the research becomes apparent through the medial multitude of works, experiments, gestures, images, texts, and a vocabulary serving as a form of architecture. He has developed and employed strategies of narrating, staging, composing, but these are realized according to aims of unsettling, decomposing, inverting, and queering the agential, spatial, temporal conditions and conventions of theatre. As a continuation of these strategies, and as a means of maintaining urgency and relevance throughout the continuity of the artistic practice, he has also applied some of these strategies to the academic context, as he has challenged academic conventions and negotiated the conditions for artistic research within the educational environment, both locally and in other contexts. The material he presents as the commentary contains documentation of these activities and their manifestations, and represents the artistic research project in its entirety. The exposition constitutes in many ways an archive, resisting indexicality while still appearing as a collection with a strict structure, which reflects a certain logic or methodology in the research. It enables what Dala Crispin has called an empathic communication of information and experience through a carefully produced system of aesthetic objects, and it constitutes a body of work, small and large-scale propositions made through individual as well as collective processes. It serves to document, demonstrate, and communicate the complexity of the research and of the insights produced through the research, and situates the project through various gestures of commemorating the staged and the scenographic as we have hitherto known it. The various artistic instances are primarily communicated through visual or audiovisual documentation, sometimes extensive, as in the case of the theatre season and We Sank, which is a research project within the research project, a site-specific installation, as well as a catalogue consisting of 161 prototypes of the stage of a future, made through a collaborative process in either Tokyo, Paris, Helsinki, Barcelona, or Daegu, and with corresponding titles and texts. A verbal description accompanies each instant of artworks in the exposition, and it serves to contextualize the artwork in terms of how and where, but never when, it was performed or conceived. In cases where we are looking at a collaborative result or process, and there are quite a few of those, the nature of the collaboration is described, and the collaborators, human as well as non-human, are identified. Some of these audiovisual montages also contain verbal articulation as part of the artwork, sometimes directly addressing the research questions and methodology, as well as references. The written elements consists of diverse forms of text that has occurred during the project as responses to expectations of verbal articulation that occurs within the educational context, such as the research plan, a research grant report, postdoc research proposal, a draft for job application, as well as an index defining core concepts and references. These texts are somewhat detached from the artistic practice, seemingly corresponding to the desires of the system, or as artistic research manifests within the educational context. In the material, and counter to research conventions, the inherent processes of question formation, analysis, and synthesis that the research is funded on is consistently never explicitly articulated, contextualized, or explained in traditional academic manners. They are left in the folds to be discovered, to appear through the visual, sensual, social, discursive processes that engaging with the work or the documentation of the work enables. Through the material, gradually and over time, different aspects of the candidate's intentions, theoretical foundations, references, as well as concerns appear in various forms. A particular epistemic claim is entangled in the material, as there is an insistence that the knowledge produced through the research must be allowed to appear in an implicit way, sensuously, through the documentation of the artistic practice embodying the research. The material testified to a continuous negotiation of the challenges brought about by this intention in order to be consistent to its epistemological propositions, but while responding to the perceived expectations of the context. Through the insights produced in the thesis, it becomes apparent that by paying attention to the practice in its the insights produced through the thesis become apparent through paying attention to the practice through its documented iterations. The proposal is to think of knowing as processual, and the candidate invites us to acknowledge knowing as more than knowing. It is insisted upon as a process of sensing, perceiving, of being and becoming, in which the implicit and the explicit, the mysterious and the revealed, the proposed statements and the processes made present are intertwined, at once visible and invisible. And I apologize, Vincent, for using dichotomies. I know it resonates very badly with your methodology. But while we sometimes wonder if open doors are being kicked in, as art as well as artistic research is founded upon acknowledging material entanglements and processual thinking and sensuous knowledge, It is clear that this project is motivated by how the candidate recognizes in theatre, as well as in himself, an elaborate system of mastering the world through dividing and conquering, while presenting the world in ways that may be perceived as unrevealed. The very mechanisms of theatre is thus based on dominating distinctions, categorizing and built on dichotomies and binaries. So throughout this research, the division of stage and backstage is, for example, seen as an unsustainable manifestation of the system of power. And the candidate consequently chases and challenges these mechanisms as they appear, arguing for the necessity of and trying out how to make ideas felt, or how to playfully and theatrically move between experientially different worlds. For this purpose, a fluid, decentralized perspective is consequently tried out, inviting us to access the dramatic material from a place that seeks to enable us as spectators, as part of the virtual and weathered entanglements of the world. So what characterizes this theatre is ongoing change, process, landscape, weather, made apparent through these procedures that you've heard as heterochrony, anachrony, pluritemporality, and idiorhythmy. The research also offers arguments in the meta-discourse of artistic research, insisting on artistic practice as a primary vehicle for conducting and communicating research, supported by theoretical and philosophical interests. Also, by handing the work of synthesizing over to the viewer, the candidate seeks to redistribute agency and avoid being the authoritative figure of the director, imposing a way of understanding this body of work with the spectators. In itself, the proposal constitutes an important, or this proposal constitutes an important contribution to the art of theatre making, directing, as well as to artistic research. And I will hand the word over to Carl.
Hi, Ellen. Thanks so much for that really interesting and clear, I thought, exposition of what the research is doing. I'm just about to say too, just to kind of be in touch with the research, a massive burst of sunlight has just opened in the clouds in Glasgow, which has not been so evident this summer. So I'm delighted to see that the weather is already playing into Vincent's hands in his direction. So yeah. So Vincent, thanks so much for this PhD. I really enjoyed engaging with it, and I also really enjoyed engaging with you, your colleagues, and also Ellen. So it's been a really creative thing for me. And now I'll kind of read this exposition. This PhD makes a successful job of contextualizing and indeed performing the central research question that it poses itself, and which revolves around what it might mean for a theatre director stroke practitioner today to reacclimatize the stage for a world caught between a digital revolution that it doesn't fully understand and a planet, a climate in turmoil. Put simply, the reacclimatized stage that the PhD presents us with is a stage, we might say, for the Anthropocene, a history, our time, in which nature and culture are entangled and embraided, and where ideas of time, place, culture, subjectivity, extinction, architecture, and of course theatre, to mention only a few, are all in a process of transforming, mutating, becoming new, and also, and quite amazingly at the same time, becoming old. Importantly, and entirely consistency, and with real intellectual and artistic rigor, the candidate has adopted an original approach to the construction of a discursive thesis. Instead of presenting information according to standard academic requirements, a written argument structured according to a linear pattern and divided up into chapters with an introduction and a conclusion, here the candidate instead has produced a digital platform, a kind of computerized memory stage, in which the reader is able to find documentation, videos, transcripts, GIFs, etc., entangled with a series of written texts, mapping the ever-changing nature of the research process, and I would stress that word, process. In keeping with the candidate's interest in producing a stage that would transform extant ideas of Western time, the examiners are presented with the choice of how best to navigate this thesis temporally and rhythmically. Should one, for instance, spend days on the website, looking at every document, reading every text? Or is it acceptable to skip read or speed read some of the information and images? Of course, there is no definitive answer to this, and one needs always to trace one's own way through, opening oneself up in the process to the contingencies and thicknesses of the time in the digital, of glitches, of stutterings, of forgettings, of memories, of repetitions, of moments of insight, of moments of discovery, of moments too of boredom, moments of provocation, and moments of real excitement. In my case, I engaged with the document initially over a period of 6 weeks or so, and found myself changing my initial opinions on several occasions. I was moved. In that respect, there is no doubt that the thesis, in its discursive scale and sheer scope, its magnitude, we might say, successfully managed to provide and to perform a coherent research inquiry into what it might mean to experience time in the so-called Anthropocene, to find oneself lost, delighted, confused, archived, panicked, stretched, multiplied, weathered, fragmented, and of course diffracted. Perhaps we might even say that a reacclimatized stage necessitates a reacclimatized way of thinking, which in turn necessitates, I would imagine, a reacclimatized way of doing, and also presenting research, one that impresses itself effectively on the body of the spectator, reader, examiner, which is why perhaps I've used so many metaphors in this report. There is no doubt that this thesis demonstrates successfully what an Anthropocenic stage might look like, theoretically and practically. In common with thinkers such as Rosie Bredotte, the work has no interest, as the candidate explains and shows, in abandoning the human or in giving up on drama. On the contrary, the point is to displace the human, to show what is normally backgrounded or hidden on the stage, and so transform the stage into a more than human space, a kind of pre-earth. As the candidate says, the ambition is to decenter, to make the stage into a middle or a milieu. The presence of the plastic sheet in the work in Venice is particularly resonant here, for it both reveals and conceals at the same time, allowing the stage to be opened up to the non-human force, if we can even say that today, of the weather. Here then, as the candidate points out on numerous occasions, the spectator does not follow a dramatic narrative, but rather opens himself, herself, themself to different, more anarchic, queer, or idiorhythmic timescales. Similarly, the attention given to redirecting Shakespeare uncovers what some eco-critics have long argued, namely that these works were always already engaged in a deep reflection on nature and its transformation by humanity. It is interesting in this respect that the candidate should be so concerned with The Tempest and relating that play, especially The Storm, to Mark Mazelin's thesis on the beginnings of the Anthropocene in the early modern period in the 16th century. In the candidate's thesis, this, of course, is contextualized within 3 distinctive strands. 1, other practitioners, and I name them: the Wooster Group, Chris Verdonk, Samuel Beckett, Heiner Goebbels, Philippe Ken, Philippe Perreno, Gonzalez Foste, and perhaps 2, Robert Smithson. 2, academic theorists working in the fields of post-humanism, ecological thinking, new materialism, process philosophy, and theatre and performance studies: Karen Barad, Morton, Stiegler, Haraway, Deleuze, Masumi, Kershaw, Ahrens, Fuchs, Chowdhury, etc. And 3, practice-based researchers, as Ellen, who's talked about, concerned with alternative ways of presenting academic research. To conclude then, there is no doubt whatsoever that these connects and conjunctions provide the necessary and appropriate context for the double ecology. Maybe even double isn't the right word, maybe it's a million ecologies that the candidate is interested in. This is one in which the biology and the digital, organic and inorganic worlds, material and virtual universes overlap with each other for the purpose of a number of fundamental reacclimatizations in which the re is not a turning back, but a re that looks forward without, however, ever determining what that future is. So in the spirit of redirecting now, I pass you over to my colleague, Ellen Røed, with whom I've had enormous pleasure doing this PhD, and Ellen and I will continue the dialogue now with Vincent through a series of questions.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
So, Vincent, the central concern in your research is time, temporality, something that you are addressing in the work, as well as through several explicit articulations of your aim of challenging the chronology of the spatial-temporal conditions of theatre. But a set of concepts and conditions that is less explicitly aimed for, articulated or discussed, but which seems to be equally thoroughly explored and experimented with, and which seems equally important, to me at least, in an intertangled and codependent way, has to do with space. So a complex understanding of spatiality and place constitute a very strong as well as important aspect of your work. Clearly, you have a quite specific take on spatial conditions, inseparable from temporal conditions, but as porous transient passages appearing through performative presences. And all your work involves a strong site specificity and a form of generation of place occurring through elements of performance. Could you elaborate on how this specific activation of places as sites occur in the heterochronic theatre? You also mentioned that you're inspired by visual artists who work with a form of time-oriented site specificity. And you mention, as Carl has already said, Dan Graham, Gordon Matta Clark, Robert Smitten, Pierre Hugues, Philip Pereno, all men, by the way. Engaging with your references, could you also reflect on how sight occurs when nothing can exist outside of the stage any longer?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me correctly? Okay, thank you very much for your comments, first of all. And thank you for the question. I have started the whole project based on temporal concerns. I would say that the research project might have started already 10 years ago when I decided to get away from a certain economy and ecology of theatre making. And the main component I had to drift away from was identified as a temporal alienation. So this is and it was at the same time. There was a simultaneity of reading or rereading Derrida and the text of Derrida on time, on différence, on going away from logocentrism from a temporal perspective. But you were right, by drifting away from the theatre or the temporality of theatre, I drifted away from the theatre as space and architecture. Interestingly, one of the first projects I did in 2012 would be to whiten a theatre, to repaint a whole black box in white. So I guess this is quite contextual, spatial, site specificity gesture that not, let's say that is not referring directly to temporality, but more to spatiality. So I think that, as you say, space-time are definitely not separable. I would say I've been also saying very much. I am revising the spatio-temporal conventions of theatre making. So I have always taken the spatial consideration in. And yes, when I do a Backdrop Venice in 2017, my main concern is to reveal the environment which was concealed on Canaletto's painting that I am reenacting on the San Marco Square. But what Canaletto does, he puts, I mean, in the painting we see a monochrome sheets behind the actor. So basically, the backdrop of the theater is here to hide the environment, the backstage, to produce an attention on the actor. And then producing this attention in the actor, it produces an attention on the temporality of the actor, temporality of the being, temporality of the spectating. But when I reenact it by taking the actor away, the stage away, but just keeping the backdrop, which is a semi-transparent PVC that allows to access the environment, then you're right, the first consideration, the first temporal consideration turn into a spatial expansion of the stage. But they are very, 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 I mean, they are intertwined and tangled like together all the time. It's just that I think that it was important for me to organize the research, to choose one of them, and to base the research on 3 senotemporal turns was for me some kind of methodologically allowing to progress through. And you're right, the artists that I am referring to are visual artists, site-specific artists. Some of them are women. I'm referring to Dominique Gonzalez-Forster, to Gisèle Vienne, so they are not all men. And I think if you check the artography, I think there's quite hopefully a balance in between the genders and beyond the genders. So, do I answer your question?
Yes, I think
it's a big question.
I know. I think you do. I was referring to, there is a specific passage in your text when you mentioned these specific artists who work with this time-oriented site specificity, and that's where that kind of list of names came from. So that was maybe unclear, but I think you answered very well the question. And I just would like to add that I think the generation of site is a core strategy of yours in almost every work. And I think it's intriguing for example, in the Finnish Kilpisjärvi lake, what happens in that spot in the lake that is kind of a generic place. I think there's something very, very interesting going on there that you can think more about, maybe.
If I can just add something, I think that speciality space, site specificity, has been very much addressed and researched also, of course in visual art, but I think also in theater, site-specific art. And I think there was also an interesting gap to contribute in, which was to direct the research towards time concerns, temporality, especially when, as I said, in French, the word temps means at the same time time and weather. It gave a semantic possibility to play with the word temps and to open the research on the weathered theatre that would address also a revised temporal ecology. So yes, and yes.
Thank you.
Okay, hi Vincent.
Hi.
I'm sorry to keep making these strange kind of idiosyncratic interventions, but as we were talking then, I had enormous sadness that I haven't seen any live performance for so long. And I just wanted to acknowledge that with the relationship to site. Anyway, Vincent, back to you. what I'd really like to do, I'm aware that we have an audience here, and one of the really interesting things about your thesis is the way in which that you are constantly, maybe in the manner of what Deleuze and Guattari talk about and what is philosophy, is that you're constantly producing concepts, you know, new ideas, new concepts, which I really love. However, given that this is public, could you maybe do a couple of things for me? Could you explain what you mean by words such as ecotone, the word peregonal, which is obviously, I imagine, is a Derridian word from The Truth in Painting. And I'd also like to know, again, it's another Derridian idea. What are the status of the postcards in your title and also in your thesis? So if you could maybe just very simply, perhaps, well, maybe that's impossible, but if you could maybe explain just the title, just kind of lead us through the title.
Yes, thank you for the question. It's interesting because the question of double card might follow Ellen's question of space and spatiality. And basically, double postcards, I think they are in the publication to indicate geographies, spaces, spatialities, and also the title of the double postcards is Theatrum Mundi. So it's also a way to play with this notion of Theatrum Mundi, and to give windows to the hyper-reader of the different sites, geographies, spaces where the research happened, and possibly simultaneously. That's why the idea of the double postcard is might be at the same time in Montreal and Palo Alto, Venice and Helsinki. As much as there's no dates, clear chronological dates in the commentary, there is a possibility, a possible blurred trouble geography. In one project, which is Wakanai Patagonia, I refer to Jorge Luis Borges' idea about a non-exact geography, and I think in Borges this non-exact geography might overlap a non-exact temporality or non-linear temporality. So double postcards is kind of maybe are here to produce this simultaneity, the simultaneous geographies on which heterochrony might operate too. So the title of the piece, yes, it's interesting. Thank you for the question. It's an interesting question because we are now engaging with words, and I have to answer you with words. And we are in a defense, which is, as I said in my preparatory lecture, which is based on an exchange of words that might also show a possible mastering of the whole through the logos, through the words. May I suggest something? That I would not reply to you by telling you what is ecotonal, but by reading it from the commentary itself, because you can find it. There is a glossary in the publication where I have addressed those words, and I think I would be happy for the public also to read what is an ecotonal piece, what is a paragonal writing, and would this be okay as an answer? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to dive in the publication. So I might have forgotten where it is exactly. So B8. Ecotonal piece. An ecotone is a transitional area situated between two ecological systems or milieu, a border region where two territories and communities meet and overlap, blend or collide with more or less tension. Tone comes from the Greek tonos, tension, stress. The term appears in the subtitle of the research project as ecotonal peace, the doctoral exposition being engaged as a transactional locus where art and research forces enter a more or less tense process of hybridization. So I was interested by taking this ecological term to express the relationship between art and research and the constructive tension that might read and perform in the publication. Then paragonal, this terrible word. Say in pre-modern art theory and criticism identify a paragon with elements such as background action in a history painting, the inclusion in a landscape of picturesque embellishments, or as Kant writes in the Critique of the Power of Judgment, as the addition of ornament to a painting, a statue, or a building. Jacques Derrida reintroduced and reoriented the term of paragon into contemporary critical theory in The Truth in Painting after Kant, and making it differ from its usual meaning, that is to say something subordinate of or accessory. For Derrida, the paragon as edge, frame, threshold, or margin, and in particular that of the border of the artwork, operates as supplement that reopens the reading of the paragon object. So in this exposition of the research project, the notion of paragonal writings present in the subtitle is inspired by Derridean position and accounts in that redirection for the iterative aggregation of the writing produced during the 4-year doctoral course. It is intended to play and multiple of enunciation of research according to different time frames and responding to different institutional contexts, demands, and conditions. So this paragonal writing supplement in the manner of a multivocal cloud motif and no longer frame the artistic practice in order, on the one hand, to foil what could be a centripetality of a monovocal and monofocal reflective writing, and on the other hand, to play with the convention of straight juxtaposition between practice, writing about the practice, by mirroring the latter dichotomy with a deconstructive distortion. So that's the way I take paragon as a margin or the edge of the artwork. I use those writings as margin and frame for the art experiments, and I intend them not to operate as kind of dialectic explanation, but they might reopen the project towards another direction. So that's for paragonal and double card.
That's great, Vincent. I also, I was just thinking, I really like, I hadn't really seen that before, the way in which you discussed the postcard. And again, I was thinking about how in the postcard, it's not just that the postcard, the letter, if you were to use a Derridean word, never arrives. It's like space never arrives either. We always think of space as being the fixed thing. And what you've kind of done is that you, by your postcards and your work for me, is that you've made a piece that neither space nor time ever come. They're always in process of being. And I really like that idea, that kind of, which of course resonates too with your idea of the inevitability of failure. So yeah, great. Thanks very much. That's really enlightened it for me. Thank you.
Wow. I'm intrigued by this notion of ecotone. I've used it myself as part of my research, and I think what I really like about it is that it doesn't have a strong kind of reverberance in critical theory. It's kind of, and it's a poetic word, and it does that combination of like when two ecologies meet, and I think it's a good word for your research. And I was not planning to to quote from your commentary. I think I'll still do that, although we've just been through it. I don't think I'll share my screen. I'll just read it, if that's okay. So you say that you're interested in, and I quote, stages that poetically engage with and respond to environments, sites, landscapes, and landscape transformations on Earth and beyond, changing weathers, ecosystemic sustainability, social justice, anti-racism and decolonialization of practices, radical otherness encounters and alien antimatters, utopian leftovers and uchronic charms, post-non beyond human but also vegetal and animal scenic turns, multiverses and in-planetary cultures, digital cultural and algorithmic biopolitics, speculative architecture, thinking, extinctions, finitudes and mourning, eco-anxiety and hope. So, quote end. So, what I would like to talk to you about a little bit is scale. So, what is the relationship between time and scale, and what happens to the body in these relationships? And I'm thinking, because as Carl says, we have seen, luckily, him and I, 2 of your artistic installations, because we have examined them as part of the thesis, namely the theatre season, or the Redux version, and We Sank. And in both of those works, scale also seems to be a very dynamic and important notion. So I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit on what happens to the body in relation to scale in these works. And if you could also elaborate a little bit on your body. Where is your body, your collaborator's body, and the viewer's body in these works?
Just a minute, because the technicians are making big signs to me, so I don't understand what they want me to do. So I just ask, sorry. Stop sharing if you want to have the I stop sharing. Okay. Thank you. So my screen was shared. So I'm back. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much for the question on scale. I think it's the continuation to the question on space, site, and scale. And I know that we might have we can have a dialogue, and also maybe in the future about this, because I know it's very much about what you are engaging with from in your research with images, site. So the first, and the question of the body, they are very, very difficult questions, because they lean on metaphysics, and I don't want to talk about time, space, movement, body. I think they are quite metaphysical notions, and I'm not a philosopher here to engage philosophically or theoretically with that. And I would like to give an answer as an artist and researcher about those notions, because they are also notions that we are dealing with. The first thing was how to move away from the architectured stage where something is going to happen on the stage. So there was somehow a primary scale that was defined through architectonics of a Western theater based, let's say in the theater that I was practicing, based on more Roman theater than Greek theater. Let's say Roman theater that put a back wall at the back of the stage and reinforced the attention on the human body, the Vitruvian man on stage. So that's the scale number one. Western theater for me has been engaging with the body as a scale that we can also find in Le Corbusier modular, like the measure of the scale is the body. And I think the Western theater has very much operated from this measure, not only architecturally, spatially, but also affectively engaging with human passions and human affects and emotions, and to purge the human body from the passions. So I needed to destabilize this scale 1, and so I had to open the stage, the architecture, by letting in what I call in the scenic temporal turn number 2 the biospheric and living entities agency in the stage. So that was somehow enlarging the scale towards another scale, which was biospheric, geological, weather oriented scale. So already there was an expansion to the out there, but I mean what we used to call nature, let's say the word. But working on this rescaling by welcoming the biospheric living entity agency in, I in the middle of the process I started to realize that there are entities that I am letting out and I should take in. They are the technological so-called artificial entities, algorithms, computational matters, wires, networks, and then the scale changed again and got the enlarged body scale through biospheric scales overlapped algorithm condition scales, and they are very different. So I had to somehow work with this double postcard, let's say, of the environment, the what we used to call nature and what we used to call in the 90s the matrix, and to put together, and this produces a very turbulent sense of scale that I try to address through the artistic experiments, and especially when I kind of entangle on the same backdrop so-called representation of nature and algorithmic modification of the same landscape, for example. Does this answer a bit your question? Where is my body and the body of the spectator? That's another big question.
I think Vincent, what I'm also thinking about is in this perspective, of endless pasts and futures and the kind of beyond Earth. But I think at the same time your work addresses very much my perception, the sensuous, my perception of being in your work with my body. Like I am big and the objects I'm looking at are small and they are on the floor and they are distributed. So that does something very significant to my perception that has to do with my body. And also because you're referring to posthumanism and Rosa Braidotti, I think this is also in a way you're implying that you're not really thinking of a we here. At least how I read your work, that you are also very much interested in that this would be very different for me, for you, for Carl, right? And for all the other viewers of your work. And then in Theatre Season, there is a I know now the chronology is, but that doesn't matter. But the boots, for example, that you made us put on, and for the audience, I can just explain there was this kind of white forensic textile boots that we put on before we entered the installation, as to, I think, the kind of the pristine quality of it. And again, with the strong, there they are, yes. So my body wouldn't leave a trace or a mark on in any way impact on your work. But nevertheless, the way I am in it, also with a very tactile experience of the grass, the scale, the very strong light, it activates in the same way as I would say about the site, it activates my body as a perceiving, sensuous responder to your work. And I think it almost couldn't exist without it, of these multitudes of bodies that visit the works.
Thank you. I think what you say make me think that probably I have made artworks in this, during the research, that are at the same time inviting you as a body, but inviting you as well as an absent body at the same time. And through this, I might address the question of scale. I think, for example, when I went to put 3 wooden beams on the ice on the Helsinki Bay, and I waited for the ice to melt. Then the ice started to crack. I could still see the 3 wooden beams that were representing what Esa Kirkko-Pelto names the obvious comprehension of the stage. What is a stage? It's the series of wooden beam together, le plateau in French, les planches. And then I would wait that the ice crack, and then I took this photograph. And the project is one photograph of this very moment where the ice has started to melt, and we kind of figure out that soon is going to melt fully, and the wooden beam will disappear in the Baltic Sea. And I say this is an open-ended project. This is what I call a hyperdrama, because it has started long ago. I put the beam at the very moment of the large-scale continuum, and it's going to continue for a long time. But there's a contingency of a body watching this at this very moment, but it's very contingent, as much as you are contingent as a guest in the theater season, and then you don't leave trace because you might not have been there, even if you would be. So this is what I try to. Maybe that answers the question of the scale. It opens a double perception of based on contingency. Maybe.
Super. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. That was that. Yeah. That kind of leads is quite. That's kind of interesting. Those kind of words like hyperdrama, body, etc. Maybe also that kind of play between a kind of phenomenology of perception and a kind of virtuality of sensation, all these things coming together, which leads me to the question in a way, Vincent, is if you were writing this thesis, if you had have been in the 2000s, or maybe, sorry, 1990s, the word performance and performativity, that's the word you would have used all the time. In my experience of reading your thesis, I didn't really get that wasn't what I took out of it. You might have had them in there, but I didn't take that out of your thesis. If you were writing it in the 2000s, you probably would have used the word post-dramatic a lot. So you neither use, for me, performance and performativity aren't really what's at stake here. We forget often that Judith Butler hated the theatre anyway. She's anti-theatrical. It's true. She never likes the theatre. She's she's part of that tradition.
She loves Beckett.
But, do you know what I mean? She's, it's the Austen, eteliation, it's all of this stuff. But but what I really take from you is an idea of theatre and theatricality. I really take this idea. And it strikes me, I'd like to know, I've got an idea what I think that you're doing with them. And I'm really intrigued about what you understand by these words. And the reason why I asked them is that you talked about one of the other things which I really like about this thesis is that there's also a kind of passion of you in there. So it's not an abstract theory. You talk about what type of director you're going to become. Or maybe it's not even a director, it's an architect. Which again leads me back to that question of theatricality. what does it mean? Of course it can never, I think Samuel Weber says that. It can never be taken away from the stage, but it's also more than the stage.
Yes.
And I'm kind of interested in what those words now mean for you, because they seem very resonant for me, Vincent, very important words.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. That's a very interesting
question. It's a very difficult question too. And I think we could make a research project on this very notion of contemporary theatricality. But I'm happy that you mentioned that I'm not working that much with the words performative and performativity from the 90s. A bit, there in the glossary there's the word xenoperformativity, so I kind of hazarded some kind of neologism here, which was also like paying tribute to a xenofeminism, xeno-architecture that have been popping out very much the last 5 years, 10 years. So I kind of like, and I quote them just to say performativity maybe has from the 90s turned into xenoperformativity nowadays, but I'm not using it that much, you're right. And then post-dramatic, it's present in the publication. As I say, I grew up theatrically as a post-dramatic director. I was educated, trained as an actor director in the end of the 20th century, last century, and then I started to direct in the beginning. So it was very much the post-dramatic moment. The Flemish director's moment, and it was very much about post-dramatic. But I think I have said in the publication that I am paying tribute to Antis Lehmann and the post-dramatic, because I consider myself as let's do the post-dramatics, but it's somehow embedded in the work. It was an important momentum, and I think it has changed very much the views on theatre. Then I'm happy that you are speaking about theatre and theatricality, because I kept on trying to bring the research back to the question of the theatre and to the question of theatricality, even though I say in the invitation to Emmanuelle Chiappone-Piriou in the publication, I want to thank, by the way, here Emmanuelle for the second artistic part. I guess she's watching in Paris. I tell her in the letter, people will ask me, what is this? This is not theatre. It's what is theatre for you? This is. So the question of theatre has been recurrently coming back about, is this theatre, what is it, what it is not. And then the question of theatricality, which is not the same than the question of the theatre. So theatre might still relate to the stage. However, we open and multiple the notion of stage. But I think theatricality goes beyond, and it's an interesting term that might bring theatre beyond the genre or the discipline or the practice of theatre itself. As much as choreography nowadays, I think, is beyond the field of dance or the field of choreography, theatricality, there touches other cultural entities. I don't know, I remember I was basically very much interested in the way you spoke about theatre and theatricality as a separation, and it's in my lecture today that separation, discontinuity, and organizing a perception of discontinuity and separation from an aesthetic perspective might have to deal with theatricality. That is a bit like rhetorical, but this is what comes to my mind when you are. It's theatre without theatre, still embedding the history of theatre, but going beyond, and it's again a kind of a locus for simultaneous forces. Semantic forces, political forces, cultural, aesthetic forces, and I don't know, actually. I don't know what I can tell more than this. It's a triggering word, but it's a bit like temps, how to define it. Hard work.
But we can work together on this.
No, I thought it was great, Vincent. I really appreciated the way in which that you were using it, and what I really liked about it was the way in which theatricality, the way in which that you were using it in your work. I really loved it because it was so full of so many things. Like, there wasn't just a repetition. It was opening up so many things in the way that we talked about before, you know, the way that Ellen talked about scale. I was always really aware that I was completely there as a perceiving subject, but there was so many other things happening. You know, almost in the sense, I think Arto says at some stage that we have never performed Shakespeare. This insane comment. And that's what I really feel with your work, that it has happened, but it's kind of what you're saying, it hasn't happened. And I really, really appreciate that. So thank you, Vincent.
Well, yeah, that was interesting. And I think one of the really interesting things also about when you use the word ecotone is because in a way, in your work, it could also be used for the tension, I think, between the articulated questions, concepts, concerns, ideas, interests that you say you're working with, and then the artistic manifestations of your research and your work. And I'm really interested in, for me, this is the ecotonal zone, right? This is where these two ecologies meet and intersect. And what I think what's revealed in an interesting way for me then is that so much of the research is only present in the one ecology and less present in the other. But that kind of tension appears in this intersection of the ecotone. Do you follow me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So that's where I've been, in a way, the most intrigued, and I think a lot of stuff appears there. So I was really happy also to see a reference in your graphies to Nancy Holt and her sun tunnels, because I think when I saw that, I was like pleased as a teacher because there's something about how light operates in your work that almost serves to queer your conceptual framework or vocabulary in a way, because sometimes it has a very kind of particular directionality of front and back, of shadow and light, that you are so kind of in the kind of articulation, you are kind of in a way claiming that you are seeking to distort that. And at the same time, there is this very, very conscious, very elaborate work that you do with light, where nothing is ever random. You have a very good mastery of light as a director, as an artist. And I think I notice it also because I'm a visual artist, maybe, so I look at the kind of that. And so this is in a way related also to scale, of course. But I was wondering if you could articulate a little bit about how you work with light.
It's interesting that you bring light, because the image that I have chosen for the communication for the defense is a gobo, and the gobo, for the audience, I can explain. It's the abbreviation for go before optics, and this is the metal filter that we use in theater stage to put in front projectors to project. Sorry. Well, initially, I I don't think so. Initially, the gobo is kind of like to represent very straight, in a straight way, an element of nature on stage. A gobo has something which is cut inside, which has, for example, the shape of a cloud. I can show you. I have one just now here. Yeah.
Super.
So you might have seen it. This is the object which is on the image of the communication. So this is called cloud number 3. And so the light goes through, and then this cloud appears on stage. So yeah, it's a project. I mean, this is an object depending on light, but I am presenting it without the light anymore. I'm presenting it as a ready-made, as an interesting burned object, and very used, and maybe interesting per se, hopefully. Then I try to answer you by visualizing the different relationship with light in the different projects, because obviously when I do backdrop in Venice, in San Marco, there is a light. There is no wind in the first place, but there is a beautiful morning, and there is a quality of light absolutely stunning, and then the weather changes suddenly, and there is this massive entries of fog in the laguna, and the light is completely, in French we say tamisé, blurred, or like opacified by the thick fog. But in this situation, I have zero agency on the transformation of the light. But I'm interested to catch the way it is changing. Yeah. So in this way, I'm not mastering it, controlling it, setting it, but I'm making myself available to the transformations and the change, and equipped enough to be able to capture this transformation. So it's the way around. So this is, in this project, for example, the way I'm dealing with light. Then there are the projects that are more staged, that are indoor, like the Wissank in the bunker, this one now, the final stage exhibition, or the theater season in the big theater in Theater Academy, where yes, I work the light differently, and for those projects, I'm interested to work with the. Back to your first question, to space, context, and site specificities, like to start with the given light. Mm-hmm. For example, here, the final stage is lit with the general neon light, because I wanted a zone of passage under construction. So I didn't need to add a light. I just added a little theatrics, but quite soft. And for the theater season, the light, I wanted to recreate a daylight, so kind of an average of the light of the project during 1 year outdoor. I would work on some kind of like calculation of what would be the average of the daylight over 12 months. So it was some kind of like recreating artificially something that would exist or not exist, because it's just an average, and the average is a measure which is not, or maybe which is gone through, but which doesn't exist on a durational way. Yeah. So it was a way. I think I like to work with this kind of ambiguity between artificial, contextual, and theatrical. All the time, I like the spectator, the visitor, the guest to be troubled by the light, or like to be a bit displaced, or not very sure that what is this light about. I mean, I'm happy if there is an ambiguity of the perception of it. Yeah. So yes, it's an element that I do work a lot, but trying also to apply the the queering of the stage to the light itself, that I'm not doing anymore the light I used to do 12 years ago when I used to be a director in a theater, even though I might have used the general light of the theater too.
Yeah.
So yeah, does it answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And again, this is also why I think Nancy Holt is such an interesting reference to your way you work with light, because in a way she works with light in a similar way as you, but also in just enabling or activating.
There's I think of a project where the light is
touching upon the camera. It's Backdrop Japan. You have 3 videos, the triptych, and one is the 600 years old pine tree, who is the reference pine tree for the pine tree which is painted on the No Theatre backstage. And this, I exactly waited the moment that the sun would hit the camera through the branches, that it would kind of enlarge the scale beyond the tree itself and play with, because as you know it, the tree was supposed to be in the back wall of the No stage, where performers would perform for the gods. So there would be no audience. So it would be the god, the performers, and the tree. So I kind of quite easily translated God by sun in this, and so there is this clear going through. Yeah. So that's yeah.
It's beautiful. I really appreciated that work. Thank you.
Okay, Ellen put these questions together, and she's put them together really well, I think. So following on from this, Vincent, it really makes sense in a way. What I'm kind of interested in, we've touched upon it a little bit, but it'd be good to hear what you think is, what's your theatre to come out from your theatre with? What type of experience? So it's that idea about, what is the role of the human? And what type of human would you like to emerge from your idea of kind of ecotonal theatre experience?
Wow, thank you. After space scale, body time, here comes the human. Okay. Obviously, topical, fundamental question here, since it is about how to drift away from a certain humanistic conception of the human towards another human, which is not anymore this humanistic human with a other than human environment outside of it, but a human which has been transformed, or which is transformed, and that is also made of other things, other temporalities, other spaces, other scales, other viruses, and technological entities. So whether we call it a post-human, a transhuman, I think this reacclimating the stage project invites the human as a transhuman, as a transformed human. And I'm not talking here about the human as a political entity, as a citizen, or but also it includes the political views on the human, because what is posthumanism if not political in the first place? So I think it's very much based on what I call them the techno-eco feminist theoreticians like Donna Haraway or Karen Barad, when she engages with the human from quantum physics. I think it's very much a human which is troubled. This is also probably coming from queer theory. Troubled, cut, divided, simultaneous, multiple, other. So this is and this is not spottable, I would say. This is not. We cannot really give a locus for that, a temporality for that. It's beyond. So I would like to invite also like the kind of like the seminal Derrida and Deleuze and Guattari with the heterogeneity, with the difference of the humans. like really like a human which is just a transitioning transactional zone of multiple influences and input outputs. So it's a mess, but at the same time it's a human that might recognize these transformations to be able to act, to be with the others, to create a community that would probably, yes, welcome this instability. So well, that could be one answer to the question. I was how to excenter the stage from the human or the in-between human only, based on the humanistic views on the human, how to deshumanize it without abandoning the human, but without also going back to anthropocentrism. I think that's the big challenge, that we keep the human in the theater, the stage, but we keep it through acknowledgement or awareness of transformations, and then we engage with this notion or this physical reality without trying not to go back to anthropomorphism, anthropocentrism, and that's for me the one of the biggest challenge. Does it answer? Please answer
no,
more, because I don't. It's a very big question.
No, that's really great, Vincent. And the reason why I ask is, the reason why I ask is it goes back to maybe the questions of scope and theatre and theatricality. So I was thinking of two things that just to have a dialogue with you in a way. I was thinking of, so Claude Régis, he says that even when there's nobody on stage, he says that there is a surprésence, he says, of the human, even when nobody's on the stage, which is really interesting. And then I was also thinking too, Vincent, which is maybe something for you to think a little bit further on, is that I'm really intrigued that you do this really brilliant deconstruction, which nobody really talks about. I find sometimes when I read these eco-critics about theatre with Chowdhury, Theresa May, Kershaw, I'm always problematized because they never really think that much about theatre itself. And we know from the readings of Lyotard, of Derrida, all the people that you talk about, that the stage is the place where the Western human subject built itself. So there's something really interesting about doing it on the theatre, which I don't think that the environmental humanities at all have considered, that you're doing this work in the theatre, the locus of the human, and that you're showing that in the place of the human, there already always is this massive non-human in it. And I really love this. I really love this about what you're doing, so that there is this surprésence, but there is also this absence as well. And I think there's loads there for you to really maybe, how would we say, like in English, to maybe like unfold more for, just for your own work as an artist and as a researcher. It's already there, and yeah, I really love that about the project. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you for
advice to continue to work with this thing. And I mean, you are quoting, or like you are referring to Claude Régis that we just lost like this year, and it's a big loss. I was like really an important director, I think, domestically, but also obviously internationally, that I really admired. And this said, I have always been a little bit reluctant, or like, let's say, questioning the theological dimension of Régis theatre based on surprésence, which kind of like project a human also in some kind of like a very centered sense of the divine, which I'm not necessarily sharing philosophically, politically. So, but yes, you're right. There's this, and I don't know why when you spoke about probably because we lost him recently, and I also admired him a lot, and I owe him very much with this research. I thought of Bernard Stiegler, who just sadly disappeared last month, and I've read very much Stiegler for this research. I have one of the term, like neganthropocenic, is basically a hybridization between Stiegler, I mean, with Stiegler and Chowdhury. So I'm really grateful, and I owe very much. So I want to pay tribute here, just through this question, and I think that the whole question of reacclimatization is what if the human that Western theatre has been engaged with has transformed, and how those transformation of the human transform in return retroactively the infrastructures of the theatre and the stage themselves. So it's kind of a loop this loop I'm interested in, this ecological loop, like transformations on how we conceptualize, perceive, live this notion of human, might transform the stage on which this transformed thing is appearing. Am I clear? And I think and I try to find artistic, aesthetic apparatus that would address this loop, and this might be by making the body disappear.
I'd just like to say one more thing, actually, Vincent. That's great. I really love that. And one of the things that, again, I think I said earlier, but now that you mentioned Stiegler, really makes me think about this, is when you and Ellen were talking about the ecotone and what practice-based or what practice research is and what the aesthetic is, I was thinking that maybe what's really great about your project is that it's not just about what Stiegler would call pensée. It's also about kind of, you know, savoir, like it is savoir vivre. And I really find this in your project, both in the way in which that you theatricalize yourself in a way, and also, just what's happening, that we're doing more than thinking with our heads. You know, we're always thinking with things. And I really like that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we will have 5-minute pause, and then we will all be back.
Thank you. So it's 2 hours already. So, do you see if people are following on the?
Is
Okay.
Stefano there? Yeah. Okay.
Is the YouTube sound back on? Yes. Okay. So thank you both of you. That was a really interesting discussion and a pleasure to listen to. And I think it relates very much. And I would almost like to say, so I guess you can almost guess, Vincent, what the next question is going to be about.
Should I guess?
Yeah. Be my guest. What are we missing?
I don't know. I would say you might ask a question about agency control and like still being a director controlling things, but in another way. But maybe
Yeah.
I'm wrong.
No, you get 12 points. That was spot on. Control and power and agency is exactly what's on the agenda now, because and I think it's very much related to what you just touched upon in terms of appearing and disappearing, and how you play very eloquently with absence and presence. And I think there is also a very interesting contrast between kind of control, because you're very concerned with the power of the director and redirecting the power of the director. You're very concerned with kind of leaving over control and agency. And I was wondering also, because I'm thinking also about something, a notion, Tim Ingalls talk about this idea of carrying along together, which I think is also a very strong invitation or ambition. I think, no, ambition is the wrong word, but there is something about that kind of allowing things to be and to unfold, and kind of including different people, bodies, agents, materials in that. But at the same time, I think your presence is perhaps in particularly strong when you are absent somehow in the work. There is something very, very interesting going on there, which I think relates to what you just spoke about.
Yes, thank you. I kind of thought that you would ask a question in this direction, just because this is something that you pointed out in your very insightful report of the artistic part already for Wisang, about the mastery, about the control, about the collaboration, how to also be maybe accepted as a doctorate based on collaborative projects, which is another question. But I mean, it's all about agency. But in the question of the power of the absence and of the kind of not reinforcing, but the reappearance of the director through the work, through the one who is still the Deus ex machina of the how the totality appear. I think I've tried to address this in the solastalgic prologue and in the solastalgic epilogue today, when I'm insisting on the fact that the agenda is not to suspend the director agency, but to re-evaluate it and then to reposition it. So I'm very, very, very this notion of repositioning is very dear to me because it helps me to negotiate with the other question, which is of control and power. I think that if I compare what I'm doing now from what I used to do as a theater director, as a straight theater director, as I call myself, like doing theater pieces in the theater on the stage, in the architecture theater at 7:30 every evening, director of a company, directing actors, and being on the top of the pyramid of basically embodying the proper director male artist. I think I've come a long way from that, and I think I've transformed. Yet I'm still interested the way the transformation doesn't prevent me for. I don't know why I think about the notion of style, but doesn't prevent me for composing aesthetically objects, apparatus that would exist also through a signature. Maybe the signature be polyphonic, and just to go back to the question of the body, if I succeed in producing artifacts, aesthetic situations where there is an ambiguity of the being here or not, where there is room for contingency to operate, then, and I think this is the way I composed the publication online, that there is a lot of room for people to create their own, to produce their own, to generate their own construction through the years, through the decades, I don't know. So I think this is the way to balance my research of inscribing a certain style. I don't know if this notion is still possible, but I don't want to say writing because I'm not going to bring the word in, but something. And also there's no comparison here at all. Please don't take this as a. But I'm thinking of Karen Barad is writing about quantum physics and how much quantum physics brings so much uncertainty, destabilization or uncertainties, and she does it through a book which is called Meeting the Universe Halfway. When Brian Massumi is addressing the necessity to look at the animal in another way, and the way what the animals teach us politically. He also writes a coherent book about it. When Pierre Huyghe is composing artworks as living organisms, there is still a calibrating of the elements by the artist that might somehow imprint a certain presence absence that I hope can be taken as an interesting control and not as what Stigler, based on Deleuze, coins as a toxic hyper control, as a dominance, as a does it make sense? So yeah, and I try. And I totally understand, and it's also a permanent challenge for me to find the balances, to find the porosities, to find the openness, to yes.
And yeah, thank you. That's I think it's very interesting, and I think the word style in this context is exactly quite spot on in a way. What also in a way intrigues me, because I was like, I wonder, is there anything like problematic or something that you don't kind of want, something that bothers you, that that you're trying to get away from, but it's kind of keep returning to your work, and how do you deal with that? And I don't mean in this sense the virus, but like something that, like an image or a color. And I actually wrote in my notes the word style. So how do you deal with elements of style that you don't like?
You mean elements of style that I don't like, but I still spot in the work? This is what you mean? Like that I
unconsciously edit them out. I'm
I'm very concerned about internalized, inherited, embedded theatre hardware I spoke about in the lecture.
Today. And I am. This is the thing. I am continuously trying to spot, to observe, to foil, to queer, to play with, because they are internalized things that are still performing through me. So I just like try to be the most aware I can be, and also relying on relationally on the other ones to spot them and to work on transforming into hopefully interesting things.
Thank you.
I mean, it is about, but this project is very collaborative, as you say.
Yeah.
And that's also a way to put a light on the internalized toxicities that we are all carrying. So collaboration is also dear for that, because it's challenging on those performances.
But I think you're also being very, very kind of hyper conscious of these things and of these processes, and quite hard on yourself. And I think there is also, I think it's the way you work is in that sense very far from carrying along together, because you are so aware and so sensitive to exactly these mechanisms. And then I thought that's why it's also interesting to talk about them, because they're not kind of inherent in the practice. They're very articulated somehow. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. I thought it was just on that topic. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about Masumi and Barad and the idea of a book. And I was just struck reading quite a lot of Barad's work that I think the only real time she mentions the theatre is when she uses a play which she reads by Michael Frayn, Copenhagen. It's really strange, you know. It's interesting. So I thought it was great. Vincent, my question is a bit more of an internal question for you. It's one that really interests me, and I really like the way in which that you were part of. I really appreciate that so much. You know, I really hate it when both thinkers and artists don't talk about their own kind of journey or transformation as if they're kind of bloodless. And I really love that about your work, and that's why I also loved about the postcards too. But can I ask you a question? You talk a little bit about it in one of your linking papers in the thesis, but it just really intrigued me. And I'm also kind of intrigued how much I'm enjoying this conversation. I haven't had this conversation for so long. But the question that I'm really intrigued by is the move that you make, you know, in your process. From, you start off with a kind of, you know, the theatre season is a deconstructionist work. And then we move into the magnificent, you know, productive plethora of stuff that's in the, you know, which is in the We Sank project with, you know, with Emmanuel. And it's about prototypes for the future without ever specifying what that future is. There are so many of them. And I'm really interested, Vincent, in that relationship and how it happened. And in particular, I'm interested, was there something in the deconstructionist relationship that opened up this plethora? So it wasn't just a deferral, it was a kind of, you know, like a rhizome in a way.
Very much, and I take the opportunity to thank also the 27 other Wisankers, who architects and artists who produced with Emmanuel and myself the 161 prototypes, like unforgettable memory. Yes, I think that when I started to drift away, what I coin as straight theatre making, opening up, perforating, deepening through visual art strategies, through other regimes of thinking of aesthetic gestures. It was simultaneous with a kind of rereading of Derrida. So the deconstruction, like the core, the Derridean core of the construction accompanied me. I mean, it was a companion, support, an eye opener. Finally, I got, the relief that it's possible to be in the gap. I don't need to consider theatre as a reparative, fixing, unitary vehicle, but maybe as a way to stay in the trouble of the gap, to quote the Haraway here. But so deconstruction was obvious. So the first gesture was to whiten theatres, was to deconstruct the theatre making rituals, habits, memories, deconstruct rehearsal, deconstructing set design. Where are the sets? What are the set becoming when they are not on stage but backstage? So it was merely a deconstructive take on undermining the conventions of theatre. And then I did the theatre season, which was very much in this kind of continuation, and it was some kind of a punctum or a peak or moment where I say, okay, I'm happy with that, or I mean, it works, and it works in a way that I recognize the research, the thinking, what I want to share, but I might go elsewhere, meaning I might shift slowly from deconstructive to generative, to producing imaginaries, and deconstruction might also produce imaginaries of some sort. I mean, it's not that deconstruction is a dry, non-imaginative moment of or like flux of philosophy, but I think I had to lighten the way I was deconstructing the given structure, the given gestures, the given positions, actor, director, to open, I would say, almost like a vivid, I won't say crazy, but like a bit instinctive flow of imagination of this idea of stage of the future. And because it was also coming from my discussion with Emmanuel, who was very much informing me with how architecture has been through deconstruction and generativeness, with all the radical experimental relational, however we call the movement of architecture. So yeah, I started and we started together to make this project and to say, okay, let's generate a bit like in French we would say à tombeau ouvert. It means like really at high speed, with a certain energy, with a pleasure, also playfulness, and yeah. So that was a moment of I didn't leave the deconstruction behind. I think I overlapped with deconstructive strategies, more generative perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I really liked that moment, and I also remember discovering through you Super Studio, which I didn't know. I love that thing. I've been watching it. What I think was really interesting in it, I think what I'm getting at, Vincent, is maybe a philosophical point, which you may or may not be interested in. But it's just this idea, I think it's Vicky Kirby when she talks about Derrida, that, that it's always about undecidability, and even un avenir, even, it's a quand même, it's un avenir. Whereas I think what you really produced for us was this notion of kind of, multiplicities of things. And I thought that was a really important moment, both artistically, for a spectator, full of pleasure, lots of different types of thinking, but also I think like really from a point of view of a kind of an ecological pragmatism, I thought that was a really, really important, brilliant moment in your thesis that I really loved. This kind of production of so many virtuals. I love that. So thanks very much for explaining that, Vincent.
Thank you, Carl.
I think actually this is a quite beautiful place to end, because in a way, for me it's the same, that shift towards the generative that started with your letter to Emmanuel and the following kind of process of Røed, it was just such an amazing turn. And that, I think that brings us, I think maybe this could be the final question then. Because one of the things that really has impressed both me and Carl about your research is your ability to continuously generate and maintain urgency, like never letting go, never becoming comfortable, right? Always keeping on. And I was curious at that point after we sank how you were going to do that. But because in a way, your research project was in a way it was concluded in a way for me. That was the kind of a very kind of significant outcome of the research. And how do you then continue for another year or two? That was like, I was thinking like, how on earth is that going to happen? But your ability to continuously generate urgency, and I think one of your strategies for doing that, as I mentioned initially, is also, as I see it, this to always bring the practice, because the practice in a way generates urgency in a very interesting way that is perhaps different in a kind of academic educational context. But in that, again, that zone that you, I think, cross so interesting by bringing this urgency in, there is, how to say it, I'm going to read you something. So, Darla Crispin identifies risk as one of the elements that help us to make the conceptual twist that turns subjective, reflexive experience into transpersonal, empathic communication that supports research transferability and modes of exchange. So that, I think, is what you do, right? And by generating urgency. So this is something that I would really like to hear you talk a little bit about it. Like, how do you deal with risk? Because on one hand, you're activating urgency on so many levels. So, and then related to that, how do you deal with failure? You've already mentioned it several times, but in this kind of in relation to risk and what also maybe a little bit, because this also happens in collaborative processes. So I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's a beautiful, beautiful quote. Also, thank you for this. It's interesting. Thank you for bringing this, because I think it's also bringing the question of fragility, vulnerability, risk, that I might not show that much by kind of operating on the aesthetic control of the whole thing. But I think it's a permanent presence of a sense of fragility. And I'm not going to expand on a biographical dimension here. That's not interesting. But there might be things that are working here also, that we are carrying our stories, and they are here performing all the time, even if they don't appear clearly. So the sense of urgency, I would relate it to this constant fragility on the one hand. On the second hand, the topic itself, I mean, the Anthropocene, the ecologizing of the theater, of the stage, to disrupt the power toxicities. It's urgent. It's urgent, and also conducting a doctorate, I wanted to be urgent in a way. I wanted to be dynamic and urgent because I wanted to tackle those topics in the moment they are shared and discussed and lived concepts, and that well, for once I'm not a very fan of the deferral, but I like the idea to do this doctorate in 4 or 5 years, because the topic is now. The topic is it's not a capitalization of on the topic. It's just because I think it has to be shared urgently, and also like the urgency or the need to make all. I need to be in the studio. I mean, as I said, the hyper production of art is also kind of trying things and also kind of keeping myself indexed to my identity as an artist within the academic research realm. So it was also somehow an affirmation of an identity within a certain within a field which is already very much welcoming those identities. But I think there's still things to be affirmed and claimed, and so. And the failure, I mean, always, I mean, it's just like it's, as I said in the lecture, I mean, failure is always part of the outcome, or like a potential failure, or like the leaking, or the going wrong. I mean, many of the prototypes are so wrong, but they are beautifully wrong and fail, especially mine. Mine are really bad. Thanks God we didn't identify them. We didn't give them. But I mean, yeah, I mean the Beckett's failing better has been also with me very, very much since the Theatre Academy, when this trying again, failing again, trying again, failing better is of course it's very but that showed it's a hot potato motto, but it's something. It's kind of nice also in artistic research, that I think is also the place where you can allow yourself to fail. Through the experimentality, which you're not that allowed in other ecologies of the art making, who goes more from project to project with shorter temporalities and some kind of idea of ascensional success story. So yeah, I mean, failing is also for me very much part of the DNA of artistic research.
And shared failure, and discussed failure, but hopefully elegant failures.
Now we need a new hour.
Yes, that's yeah. Now I spot it.
Carl, would you like to add something?
I love the idea of finishing on elegant failure. That's a nice way to end. I just really want to say that I've really enjoyed listening to you explain yourself, Vincent, and I've really appreciated being both with you and with Ellen, and also being at the Academy. I've really learned a lot. It's informing my work, and I will really miss it, which again is part of the whole jamboree. So I really thought you did a great job, Vincent. Well done.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, me also. And I'm really sad that we are not there and that we're missing out on the final stage, which also then makes me want to ask, so what comes after? But we can talk about that when it happens. But it seems to be an amazing installation from what I gather from YouTube.
Thank you. So I think it's time for your final statement, right?
Yeah. Ellen?
First, yes.
Ellen's first, yeah.
Yes. So the artistic research project, doctoral thesis of Vincent Roumagnac, picks the protective, homogeneous ordering structure of theatre apart and throws the remnants out in the weather into a presence that is situated, windy and wet, as well as abstract, and it is as virtual and it is material. Here he experiments with what theatre and theatrical architecture and scenography, as well as presence, can be now, disturbed by altered conditions, how they can be considered to enable a plural and distributed presence, sometimes through absence, and how this alters conditions and structures of time. While investigating and experimenting with spatial and dramaturgical strategies, he also explores knowing as processes of learning and processes of claiming through and in artistic practice, as well as in means of communicating and documenting research. The strongest qualities of the research are found in the ability of the project to exist in a variety of situations, formats, and media, while being sensitive or perhaps responsive to these. By resisting all forms of binaries, the project seeks to be always manifold, algorithmic, and sometimes viral, to be actual, material, as well as speculative, and to appear and disappear through and against the various concepts, questions, claims, methods, reflections, and deflections that occur as the researcher is rambling around in a world that is unfolding around him in the most extraordinary as well as ordinary ways, employing strategies of making and doing that challenges, responds to, and negotiate the conditions that he lives and works under as an artistic researcher as well as a theatre maker. At once protagonist and crumbling architecture, weather and machine, milieu and passage, theatre remains a model for understanding the world, a tool for transformation, for storytelling, through these revised strategies and dramaturgies of staging. It activates environments, places connected to the being of the world, in the world of its director. The project bears witness of a research process that searches for new modes of practice and as a result generates knowledges that collapses distinctions between artwork, practical or methodological sections. The research is precise, rich, successful, and of high artistic quality. The exposition enables encounters with the research that vividly engages and demonstrates the potential for a rethinking of scenic ecologies of time and space. It is an exemplary instance of an experimental and transdisciplinary artistic practice where thinking, researching, and knowing is inseparably embedded in artistic development.
Wow, great. Okay. Vincent, it was a real privilege to follow this thesis through from its beginning to its end, if end is the right word to use for a project that is mutating, bifurcating, shooting this way and that, like a rhizome, and discovering its own virtuality again and again. In my own return to the project over the past week or so, I've been struck by how the whole thing works like a refrain, asking me to become part of it, to get lost a little in it, and also to be moved around by it, to find links, to make conjunctions, to go on a million line of flights. The project for me offers something important to the environmental humanities, one in which theatre is not a majoritarian art, something that has to represent ecology as a theme or a message to act on. Rather, and this returns us to the temps in tempeste or tempête, theatre as you have it, Vincent, serves to weather us, to make us aware of a whole pluriverse of temporalities percolating through each other, providing us with so many futures that are always already here and also in the past. In that respect, the thesis, the practice, the writing, the documentation, the thinking produces what we might call a virtual ecology. That is, an ecology in which the potential of the world to become other than what it is intensified, increased, and expanded. Vincent, then, it is entirely correct to call your stage a milieu, a site where possibilities hover in the air and where spectators are drawn out of themselves, giving a space to recreate themselves in and to set out for new territories. In the Poetics of Relation, Edouard Glissant, somewhat in the manner of the queer phenomenologist Alfonso Lingis, said that the earth is a poetic force that human poetry draws from and expresses as a kind of shiver, un tremblement, as un tremblement de la terre. Poetry then does not represent its pulses, and what it pulses with, says Glisson, is quite simply the taste of the new in its newness, in its coming into being, not as an image. Vincent's project works like that too. It makes me believe in the earth again. It touches me, it puts me in motion. Here theatre is an opening, a reacclimatization, to return to the very beginning, to Vincent's title. Importantly, to be reacclimatized is not only to be made aware of the climate, as so much activist work asks us to acknowledge, it is to learn how to live differently, to become changed. Importantly, I think, Vincent reacclimatizes us through the theatre, through our experience of a stage, a word which in English has a temporal as well as a spatial aspect, a sense of being underway, of coming to a stage in a journey which is yet to come to an end. In one of his linking documents, Vincent said this, and I quote, "Actually, I have a question for you, may I? What do you examiners come to examine? Will you expose yourself to the art per se, as the other spectators in the bunker? Or will you have a peculiar, let's say functional gaze on the proposal, a special mission to decode the research through art in the context of doctoral studies?" In response to this provocative question, Vincent, I would now say the following. In proximity to your work, I'm neither an examiner nor a spectator. I think I'm just a thinker. Your work makes me think with it. And at the very end of this process, after so many reports and commentaries and viva voces, I still haven't finished with it. Its meaning is still to come, even though somewhere in me knows already what that meaning is. But in the meantime, en attendant, I await its arrival avec patience, with patience, with passion. To repeat a word that was repeated so often in the We Sank project, I am still considering. And all the emphasis is on the ing, on the present participle, the most theatrical of words, the most unfinished of all the tenses, the one that reaches out, the one that sweeps away. On behalf of myself and Ellen Røed, I hereby propose to the Research Council of the Theatre Academy, and I'm delighted, as is Ellen, that the doctorate of Vincent Roumagnac be accepted. Well done, Vincent.
Thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you, Vincent. Really well deserved.
Thank you very much for your general statement or appraisal. Now, if anyone present there, somewhere, in the auditorium, wishes to make any comments concerning my doctorate, please ask the Custos for the floor.
Yes, and the audience in the Auditorium 1 are welcome to use the laptop provided by Tutke for sending your questions via chat in Teams. We will wait for a while if any would emerge.
I come back in 1 minute.
Oh no, I really hope someone will ask the question. It's kind of like, yeah, back to the dishes.
It looks like there are no questions. So Yes, no questions from the audience. The public defense has ended. Thank you.
Well done, Vincent. That was really lovely to hear.
So